Joan Cartan Hansen. Thank you for joining us for this Dialogue Web Extra. We're talking about school budget cuts. Let's go to our first phone caller. We've got Steve in Boise. Steve?
Hi, how are you?
Good, how are you? Go ahead.
So I have no doubt about the dedication of the teachers, was mentioned earlier. But my understanding is that if you adjust for inflation, teachers have not had a meaningful pay raise in 20, 30 years. And my concern, I'm wondering, is that when teachers work, are teachers subsidizing, to what extent are teachers subsidizing the education by working hours beyond what's required in their contract and using their own money to supplement materials in the classroom? And by doing so, are they maybe inadvertently masking or enabling a situation so that the voters don't fully appreciate the magnitude of the financial situation?
I'll put that to the panel. Thank you. Go ahead.
I think you're absolutely correct that educators, we did a poll a couple years ago, and the average that a teacher spends is over $500 a year out of their own pocket for other people's children who attend their classes. And I've talked to many teachers who spend upwards of a couple of $1,000s a year for the students in their classroom. And I think you're right. Teachers go to school early, and they stay late. They're there on weekends, and they do pick up the slack when our policymakers don't fund schools. And I just don't know how long they're going to be able to continue to do that. And I know that I've talked to teachers who will no longer be able to spend the $500 because that's what they're being cut, and so they won't be able to do that any longer.
I agree absolutely with what Sherry said, but I also just want to say that I don't believe it's just teachers. Administrators also are putting in lots of hours. We're asking them next year in our district to do the equivalent of 2 or 3 jobs at the same salary that they've had. And they put in many, many hours, and they volunteer, and they do all kinds of things. So I think educators as a whole, absolutely, that description fits.
I agree.
Jeffrey?
But I don't think it is exclusive to that particular service industry. I think all service industries, we are employed in that service. We provide that service not necessarily for the economic gains, but because of the altruistic attitudes that we have for joining those services. And whether you be a school board member or a firefighter or a teacher or whatever, you're in it for some other reason other than economics, and all of us give in that regard.
Oh, I'm sorry, I thought that was Jeffrey who talked. I'm sorry, that was Mark, so let's toss it over to Jeffrey. Thank you, Mark.
Well, Mark is correct in one way. In order to become an educator, it's because you do love children and you want to serve in that capacity and nurture them and help them and so on and so forth. But as Sherry mentioned, and rightfully so, it is a profession. And as such, teachers and administrators need to be treated like professionals and paid adequately. And to receive cuts after cuts, year after year after year, it's, number one, it's demoralizing. Number two, it really hits the pocketbook. And it also hurts the overall economy. Mm-hmm. Educators in my community, they buy their groceries locally. They buy their car locally. They buy the computer. They make a house payment. They do all those things. And when we cut their money, then they don't have the resources to go and spend. So there's another negative aspect to this as well. Educators, they are not. They didn't take a vow of poverty when they became an educator. They did it. They want to serve children, but they also want to be able to make the house payment and rear their children and so on and so forth. And so we need to support them financially.
There is something wrong with the thinking that Idaho educators should somehow be more altruistic than their counterparts across the country.
Or anyone else in the community.
Right.
For that matter. We've had 2 calls about lottery money. Where does if you could just very quickly explain where the lottery money goes?
Well, up until last year, districts were compelled to place their portion of the lottery money in their plant budgets to improve buildings. Given the financial situation the last 2 years, districts now have the ability to use it for their general fund if they choose.
Okay, we have a caller from Robert in Grangeville. Robert, go ahead. Robert, you there? Go ahead.
Okay, what I can't understand is I sent my daughter to school for an education, not for sports.
Okay. Well, let me ask the panel about that. Thank you for calling in. There's some who do argue that, if we lose sports, we lose that. We're not, the job should be to teach the reading, writing, and arithmetic. How do you feel about that? Mark, let's toss up to you first, Mark.
Well, I think you have to provide it all. I think we all know that a healthy body contributes to a healthy mind. And whether that healthy body comes through extracurricular activities or a physical education class or through proper nutrition through the school's lunch and breakfast programs or through their artistic programs, all of it has to be provided so that you have a whole child, not just a child who understands math or science, but also understands the fundamentals of human language and communication and how ecosystems work together.
I have a.
And Joan, the American public education system has always been a liberal, broad-based education system. We, like Mark said, we educate the whole child. I support athletics and extracurricular activities, sports teams, and so on and so forth, because it teaches teamwork, discipline, sacrifice, hard work, and representing something beyond yourself. When you put on that uniform and you're representing your school, and it's not just yourself, it's your school, it's your teammates, it's your community. And there's tremendous lifelong lessons in that, and not just merely studying academically.
I think it's very important, though, for us to point out, and I don't believe we've talked about it yet, that the cuts that we're talking about next year are not in the extras necessarily. In our system, for example, we chose to shrink the whole system. We put cuts clear across the board in every program. And the most serious ones, in my opinion, are the fact that we have no money for new textbooks and materials. We have cut every school's supply budget. We have cut every school's equipment budget in half. We have cut our curriculum department in half. There will be no curriculum work. There is no money in the district's budget for training teachers. Any training that happens has to come from federal money. Those are cuts that are being made at the core of education, not in what folks may see as the extras.
But we had one person say that no one was talking about the elephant in the room is what happens when the computer breaks.
That's true. We also will not be replacing computers, and our techs will have to make do with pieces and parts. And I mean, those funds are all gone in next year's budget. We cut $11.5 million before we began the negotiating process.
There was one change.
Right, I think.
Go ahead.
I was going to say, Joan, if you don't mind,
No.
I think it's important to remember that the reason that we did that is so that we could maintain highly qualified teachers in the classroom to the best of our ability, because we know that is the single most important factor in the educating of our children, is that teacher in the classroom. And so we had to trim those resources so that we would have more resources available to keep those teachers in the classrooms.
There's one, and we're almost out of time, and I wanted to get this out there. One change that seemed fairly consistent across districts was with kindergarten. Kindergarten was changed, a lot of it, and had to do with transportation. Either the schools went to a full day every other day, or more of them went to, we'll bus one way. So if you do in the morning, kindergarten will take you in the morning, but the parent has to pick them up at the half day point and then drop, or if they're half day, we'll drop them off at the beginning of the day and then school bus home. So
we will have a discussion about it in the morning. In our situation, though, it's $1.3 million to provide middle of the day busing. And in addition to the cuts of field trips that you mentioned, all districts also have a 10% cut in their overall transportation reimbursement. For us, that means we have to cut 300,000 miles a year in transportation. So that decision is largely being driven by the cost of midday busing.
Mm-hmm. Okay, they tell me what we have run out of time. I want to say a special thank you, Jeffrey Thomas, Superintendent in Madison. Appreciate you joining us there in Pocatello. Mark Moore, I know you have a school board. I know you have a school board meeting to get to, so I appreciate you hanging out with us there in Moscow. Linda Clark here
Thank
in
you.
Boise. Appreciate that. Sherry Wood, appreciate
you.
you here. Thank you for joining us. If you want to look for more information, especially about our survey of the districts, go to the Dialogue website, click on Dialogue, and take a look. And we'll see you here next time on our Dialogue Web Extra.